Mm. Mhm.
Welcome on Saturday afternoon programming. Have the best and groundbreaking.
I'm doing pretty good, darn good.
So I would love to hear involved.
Yeah. Well, my gaming journey started way back in high school when one of my friends talked me into taking the computer science AP class. I didn't know it was going to be a programming class. He was just like, "You like computers? You should take this with me." And then another friend got me playing Dungeons and Dragons, and it was just like, "Hey, I can combine these two to make games." Um, Took me a long time to actually get into games. I went to school, did a lot of. I was working at like banks and doing programming and stuff there for a while. But it was something I've always been doing as like a hobby for a long time, keeping up with a lot of tech talks and stuff like that. And then I just kind of got lucky. New World Interactive moved their studio office from Amsterdam to my hometown of Calgary, and their AI programmer, he didn't want to move across the ocean, which, who can blame him? And there was not actually a huge game industry in my town, so there wasn't a lot of local talent. So the fact that I had like a decade of programming experience and then a lot of game AI as hobby stuff was enough for me to get my foot in the door.
Uh, Fantastic opportunity.
Mm,
So congratulations.
thanks.
Not a lot
Yeah, so
right around.
so like my first year there, I was working on Sandstorm, the game that was out uh, it all had already been released. They were doing live updates. I worked on a couple of updates for that. It was funny. I started right at the start of the pandemic, like right before everyone moved to remote work. So I interviewed in the office, but never worked in the office until things opened up like a year later. But then, yeah, we started on a new project after that, and unfortunately, that project got canceled. Not going to see the light of day. Can't really talk about it.
That's always important. Pivot.
Yeah. So it was interesting because NWI, when I joined them, it was pretty similar to the same size as Afray is right now. But about 6 months into my time there, we got purchased by Embracer, and that gave us the funding to really grow. And I think we probably tripled or quadrupled in size over the course of the next year or two. Um, and so this is kind of coming back to how it was when I started there at the kind of indie scale.
Fantastic. I know one thing.
Yeah.
Watching on Excited question. What new have one or two attack behavior? Obviously,
Yeah. Yeah. So it was interesting that you mentioned Halo, because back like some of the really big innovations, Halo 2 introduced behavior trees to game AI, and that's like what's built into Unreal Engine now and what a ton of games just use by default. Um, Fear from like that same era, the mid 2000s, they introduced goal-oriented action planning, which was kind of taking some research that academia was doing into planners for AI problem solving and optimizing that for games. And that was a really interesting one because it worked great for Fear, but it didn't scale that well. So, like Fear 2, despite being built on the same AI architecture, you don't see people praising it like you do Fear 1. And that's because it just didn't scale as well. Um, so since then, there's been a lot of more, I'd say, incremental improvements, not a lot of big groundbreaking stuff. Like, oh, what kind of stuff? There was a really fascinating talk that the guys, I've forgotten the name of the studio, but they did the Suicide Squad game on like the tech that they were building to get the AI fighting from rooftops and managing all the, like the line of sights for that and when they could uh, just coordinating all that stuff, and it was really fascinating. And yeah,
that's
that's something I wish I had.
that's fascinating. I know the Suicide Squad again, kind of a infamous reputation, as far as I could tell. Um, was I guess the lot going on.
Oh yeah, like I got to talk to their devs briefly after that presentation they gave, and yeah, it was like the tech they were building for like the rooftop pathfinding for getting the AI to move like from rooftop to rooftop and whatnot. Like I think they were working on that for like 5 years. So
Wow,
like that's a huge, and so that's something uh, with all of like the games and stuff getting canceled and the studios getting shut down, like that's the kind of stuff that we're losing when like a big company invests a lot of tech and builds some cool stuff, and then the game like it doesn't all come together for whatever reason, and then if something if they do get hit with cancellation, studio closures, that kind of stuff, you just lose all that tech. So sad to see that happening. Um, For other stuff, for upcoming tech, it's actually something that's been really interesting the last 2 or 3 years. Like, there's been a lot of talk about machine learning and stuff like that for quite a while. And in games, it's been used a lot more to do non AI stuff, like not enemy AI. Like, you see it a bunch in art. I think Tree Graph is the name of the program for like generating procedural forest using AI that's been around for at least a decade, maybe two. Um, and it's only recently that I've seen some really cool stuff for using some of that for like enemies and whatnot. There was a interesting bit for was it Age of Empires? I can't remember if it was that. It was one of those like RTS games where they were using machine learning for training a system for deciding, given two armies of like whatever arbitrary composition, which one's stronger and how much more likely is it to win than another? That's a really hard thing to like have your devs kind of code out and design, especially when you're in the middle of developing the game and things, balance is changing, new units are being introduced, all that kind of stuff at a constant time. Um, and then like you have to actually calculate all that stuff at runtime. So by using machine learning for that, they were able to get a more accurate um, estimation for army strength without all that dev effort, and it's faster at runtime. But you do have to have like machine learning experts at your company to do that. So it's not exactly accessible to the indie space right now.
Something that AAA put in there.
Um, I so there's a lot of like tools and things that are built using machine learning that can be leveraged. Something like that. It is a separate skill set. So you would like if we had someone here that was an expert in machine learning and wanted to work in the indie space, I'm sure we could do some real cool stuff with it. But that's kind of hard to attract. Especially like there are so many big paying jobs in machine learning. At least there were the last time I checked. So yeah, there's lots of demand for that. Yeah, 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 yeah. Although that being said, some of those guys did get hit with layoffs too in the past year or two. So it's yeah, the industry is changing.
Biggest
Sure. Um, so one of the things that makes like having a favorite AI kind of tricky is the best AI is invisible is the wrong term for it, but it just feels good. You don't notice it. You tend to notice it the most when it's doing something bad. Um, so and like there's a lot of games where simple AI is a ton of fun and you don't need something complex. Like I love Slay the Spire. Its AI is super basic. It's like some if statements. Um, but it is a ton of fun and it's exactly what that game needs. Um, the Civilization AI, Civ 4 in particular, there was a better AI community mod. Then that's what sparked my interest in actually getting into AI in the first place. So I have to call that one out. And then The Last of Us has some really good AI that I enjoyed. And one of the nice things they've given quite a few talks and whatnot about that, and written some papers and stuff too. So it's something that I've used as inspiration for a lot of the AI that I've been working on, both here at AFRE for 5K and at New World as well.
very cool. What little
Yeah, so one of the things that I like is the how they do their coordination and searching. So when you're stealth and hiding, how they like spread out and coordinate where to search so that you feel like you're under pressure, but they do give you like enough time to find the stealth gameplay and have a good balance of that. Um, and that's something else that like just when they include it in the tech in the talk, and I haven't watched that talk in a couple of years, so it's not off the top of my head, but just how they describe how they do and build that stuff. It's always interesting to get inspiration from that. Especially because like that's a big budget game. They probably have as many AI programmers as we have programmers. So there's a lot of like complex stuff that we can't do, but even still like looking at for inspiration to be like, what's the like the low hanging fruit that we can build that'll let us do some of this and get some of the stuff that will fit well for having that kind of mix of like tactical gameplay, but also horror stuff.
that's sort of the trick.
Oh yeah.
I remember I was like always this myth that legendary they really weapons take takes in basic. Or maybe I'm dumb and maybe have how to create
Yeah,
I that is
yeah. So difficulty is definitely an interesting one. Yes, stuff like doubling the enemy's HP is really easy to do. So that is a really cheap, easy way to make things harder. Um, I've just reminded of a random story about like making games easy. This was some guy who was making a like pool game, and so he had the really complicated shot calculating, doing all the math, super hard AI, and then like the easy mode AI would just shoot randomly. Um, but he was getting feedback that the easy mode was too hard because basically when it was just shooting randomly, you'd end up with like really tricky shots that you as the player would have to make. So their easy mode ended up using all the same really complex math as the hard mode, but instead of using it to get, you know, really good shots, it was using it to set up the player so that the player's next shot would be easy. Um, that's just a random story that I find fascinating. For other difficulty stuff, there's there's a lot of things you can tweak around reaction times that make a huge difference. Um, and some of that can be as simple as like the you've got your enemy who maybe has their like idle behavior where they're just like chilling, doing whatever. You've got, of course, got your combat behavior where they're super aggro, and maybe you've got some like in between transition where like I'm alert, there's a threat around, I'm going to watch for you, I've got my gun raised. And the difference of like having an AI start in like the idle pose where their guns at their hip versus like having it up and ready to go, that however long half a second animation time, just changing which state they start in, or how long it takes for them to transition to one state to another, can actually greatly affect the difficulty just by changing how much time you as a player have to react. Um, yeah, and for, for making AI feel fair, that's another big part of it because aim bots are really easy to write. So you need to actually make the AI not hit, but still like be threatening enough. So it's really like you kind of like maybe they miss with their first couple of shots, or um, maybe you maybe the first shot always does half damage and you like cheat that way or something along those lines to like give the reaction time that you want. And so you can adjust that like rate of lock on, or how long between when they start shooting and when you actually start taking damage is something you can play with. And that was one with Sandstorm we ran into an issue on with bolt action rifles when we adjusted the timing to make it so that it was you would have a bit more time to react to enemies, because bolt action rifles take so long to reload compared to others, that when you say like miss your first two shots, the bolt action guys were basically sitting ducks. So like that's even something where you have to be able to tweak it on like a enemy by enemy setting, um, which then leads to one of the ways that's really good is like as a technical person, building a lot of easy to use tools for the non-technical players so that they can go in and tweak the stuff and play with it and get it to feel good without having to touch any code. Um, and then just iterating on it and getting it to feel good for your target audience. And that's something as well. I did not play tactical shooters before I started at New World, and we did community tests, and I'd be up and like, I've been here for a week. I'm playing against the guy who runs the competitive league and has 2,000 hours on our game. And yeah, very different scale of difficulty appreciated between like myself and them. So there was a lot of like, if it feels good for me, it's probably way too easy.
Ah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
that's the
Hmm. Yeah.
punish knock on.
Yeah, and like we were play testing a new enemy recently, and the best way to get by them was the respawn system, and you just had a bunch of players running distraction and respawning while someone else uh, actually completes the objective. And we're like, we need to change this. This is not the gameplay we want.
Assume that
Oh yeah, like you try some initial settings, and especially when you're doing early playtesting, you go for extremes. Like you don't be like, oh, let's adjust this by 10%. It's like, no, let's cut in half or let's double it or whatever and just see what happens. And then as we get closer to like release or whatever, then that's when you start to polish. And honestly, especially right now, just where we're at, where we're still like, there are still just some systems that we don't have done that when they're done will affect